In elementary mathematics, 7,000 is certainly greater than 350. An arithmetical impossibility is what can describe an event that took place at the gates of the Kenya Defence Forces Embakasi garrison, where more applicants turned up for very few opportunities reserved for the National Youth Service. But well, that is the Kenyan reality. From City Stadium in Nairobi to Kamarinj Stadium in West Pokot, we just have more applicants for any job than opportunities. The math is also getting complicated in the National Accounts book, where government is apparently borrowing outside the possible. So what happened to the national budget if supplementary budgets is the new way of life? And how about that line on national debt? Sam Sense tries to make sense of the numbers in the lucrative travel space. Jamila's memo also tries to make sense of employment and unemployment numbers. On Kaikai's Kicker, it's a public alert on a police officer in Langata. She's armed and dangerous. And on my take, don't insult our intelligence. We're Kenyans. The News Gang is here.
We have called everybody and we are telling each and every officer here, go back home, relook at the budget, relook at the expenditure, look at what is excessive as far as your institution is concerned, and make sure that you are in line with the policy of government as we speak.
So this week, it's been all about our expenditure. It would seem the government is now rather suddenly seized of its own expenditure lines, and there's been quite a few damning reports. So, Sam, paint this picture for us. What is this Felix Koskei is really talking about? What's the situation with our expenditure? How much are we spending? How much do we have to spend? What's the sort of breathing room? Just help us understand these numbers.
Right. It starts with the report of the control of budget for the full year 2022-2023. That is the period between 1st of July 2022 until 30th of June 2023. And of course, largely covers the regime of President William Ruto, because the only months that he wasn't the president were the month of July, August, and probably just about 13 days into the month of September. So this is the first report card of how the executive, the judiciary and parliament, but also the county governments, because the report will be coming soon, how they spent the money for this financial year. So when you look at it for the financial year ended June this year. So when you look at it, it is not shocking because there has been a trend in as far as how much money is going to development expenditure. And I was looking at the figures and you see that the decline started around 2019, because that's the last time we spent more than 600 billion shillings on development, which was still bad in terms of the percentage, but now we've gotten to the lowest, which is 14.8%.
And just to contextualize that, it's
right.
The PFM Act, the Public Finance Management Act, that states how much we must spend on development versus recurrent?
Yes, yes.
And what is that threshold? Yes,
so the Public Finance Management Act talks about 30% should go to development expenditure, and then for recurrent, not beyond 70%. But that is changing, and there are certain reasons to explain that. So when you look at the expenditure itself, 14.8% has gone to development, which is pretty low if you're also to compare with the amounts that are going to different departments. For instance, the roads, the infrastructure, what the National Treasury has been able to spend. So a figure of about 473 billion shillings out of all that, which is about over 3 trillion shillings, then that is low. And the explanation is that there's so much debt to pay. The debt servicing is taking more than 1 trillion shillings. If you had to look at the recurrent expenditure of the government from the side of paying salaries, maintaining the workers, it is also taking close to Actually, it's more than 1 trillion shillings. So really, when you look at the revenues the government is able to collect, it's just over 2 trillion shillings, according to the KRA, then we don't have so much space to really continue developing. But also there's the question of cash flow that is not as good as it used to be probably several years ago. So for Felix Koskei to come out and say that we need to cut on expenditure, especially travel. We just looked at it on data point, and 20 billion shillings, 20.3 billion shillings is the money that was spent on that travel, which is domestic as well as foreign. For domestic, it's 14 billion shillings. For foreign, is 6 billion shillings. But the shocking reality is, out of that, you realize that Parliament, the Presidency, the Office of the Deputy President, and the Prime Cabinet Secretary's Office, they have taken 10.6 billion shillings, which is more than 50% of the entire travel budget. So really, as he says that accounting officers need to tighten their belts and reorganize the budgets within their departments, then you really know which accounting officers are supposed to be doing that.
Okay, so again, I mean, I think this is wrapping my head around it. So 20 billion shillings was spent on travel, both foreign and domestic, by the entire government. Yes. But out of that, half was spent by the 3 offices.
By 4 offices. Well, let's look at it this way.
Yeah.
So the Office of the President, the Executive Office of the President, the Office of the Deputy President, and the Office of the Prime Cabinet Secretary, they are taking up just about 1.4, 1.5 billion shillings. Then over 9 billion shillings has been taken by the institution of Parliament. So in total, that is 10.6 billion shillings. If you look at who occupies those offices, then it is the political class. So the remainder of about 9.6 billion shillings is being shared by the rest of the public sector, including the judiciary.
Okay. Yeah, but you know, before we move forward, you know, it's now that we're focusing on those officers and how much they have spent on this travel. This is an issue, by the way, that came up a couple of months ago about the trips that were being made by the executive, particularly by the presidency. And Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua actually defended those trips. Let's listen.
Today morning, I found another headline saying that for the time you have been in office, you have spent 3 times what your predecessor spent on local and international travel. But these people are not honest enough and objective to also outline the level of activities that you have carried out in that period, because cost is determined by the level of activity. So I do invite the media to take time to find out when the president has traveled and to which country, what is the gain for the country.
And therein lies that comparison about whether we're getting value for money with these trips. Jamila?
Yeah, because something that he mentions there, he said, the headline said he was spending 3 times what his predecessor spent during that period. I remember he was speaking about headlines that came out, I think it was around June of this year, I just need to confirm, which said that it was June of this year, that said he has spent, President William Ruto has outspent his predecessor Uhuru Kenyatta on luxury spending by thrice the amount, spending it on travel, on hospitality and vehicles, despite the hard economic times that we've been facing as a country. And when you look at the comparisons, I'll look at a graph here that they have. It showed that between July 2022 and March 2023, in July 2021 and March 2022, those are 6 months of 2 presidencies, for domestic travel, President Ruto had spent 453 million and 30, while President Uhuru had spent 201,660,000. On foreign travel at that time was 88,690 from President Ruto, and President Uhuru was 16,720,000. Hospitality, it was 1.498 billion for President Ruto. That is between the periods of July 2022 and March 2023. And then 528,380,000 for hospitality for President Uhuru at the time. And then there's fuel and motor vehicles, 328 million for Uhuru Kenyatta, 105 million for 328 million for William Ruto, 105.7 million for Uhuru Kenyatta. That is what the Deputy President was talking about at that time. But then now, a few months down the line, it's now becoming a big issue, enough that you have the head of the public service talking about it makes me wonder, Yvonne, about where this data comes from that the controller of budget was talking about. Because remember, she only processes data that she receives from government offices and government departments. So this is, they send the documents to her, this is how we spend the money. And then she prepares her report. So the impression I'm getting is like there's shock, like, oh, really, this is how much we spent. Oh, my God, we went above budget. Oh, when it shouldn't be such, because this is information that is already in the government's domain, and this is action that should have been taken a while back.
Yeah.
And he talks about, I think we need to listen to the head of the public service talking about a retreat in Nairobi. Anyway, you can go to Mombasa and do the same thing, and we can continue.
Where necessary, for instance, if we have very many people going to Mombasa, heads of public, every public service, why don't you come up with a policy that we use SGR? Like, if we have money, we can go, all of us, even us, we can fly. I mean, we can go by SGR. Then we reduce, because amounts sometimes we spend so much.
A meeting that can be held in Nairobi is not necessary for somebody to go to Mombasa, and that we have addressed. You heard the PS Treasury even saying that we can even change and even use SGR to save on costs.
Even end of July this year, around July 30th of this year, the president issued a new directive on travel by top government officials. And he issued tough new rules, including a requirement that all trips by senior state officials be approved by the head of state himself, and that a trip led by a cabinet secretary, being the topmost official, will only have a maximum of 4 people in it, and that they can only travel for 45 days in a year. And there were a raft of other orders that were given, including that each trip can only last 7 working days, and can only take a maximum of 15 days of foreign travel per quarter for top officials. There are all these recommendations, these orders that were given by the president in July. Whether they've been followed to date is another matter altogether. But Yvonne, what shocks me again, and I've talked about, is the fact that this is information that was already in the government's domain. They knew that this is how much money they're spending, and should have started curbing their spending on travel, on hospitality, and all this luxury that is being talked about at a time when there's an economic crisis, at a time when this is literally, I think, a slap in the face of a lot of people who are unable to afford basic things that they need. 20 billion shillings is a lot of money, Yvonne. You need to close your eyes and start thinking about what 20 billion shillings can do.
What even 1 billion
One billion shillings can do. It's actually utterly ridiculous.
Yeah.
That this is the level where we have reached at a time where we cannot afford to be at this level.
And, what's interesting, Linus, will come to you in a moment, is that the government seems to be seized of the matter and seems to be talking about it in the public domain, that we need to do something about our expenditure, particularly foreign travel. They come up with directives, we need to curb the number of days, or, limit the number of days that are spent outside. And, they're seized of the matter, but yet it would seem a little difficult to do anything about it. On the 1st of August, Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua did speak about foreign travel, particularly regarding with members of cabinet.
Why do you have to honor every invitation that you have been given to every country? Your Excellency, at times we have tried to hold cabinet committees, we can't. 5, 6, 7, 8 ministers are out of the country. Some change clothes at the airport from one country to another. That is the truth. Why can't you regulate yourself? If the president was to travel and honor every invitation, he will be out of this country the whole year. You just have to decide what is useful and other things you can leave to our ambassadors out of the country.
And yet the irony is that it is the 2 or 3 big offices, that's the president, the deputy president, and the prime cabinet secretary, that have spent the most on foreign travel, even as they're asking their CSs to not necessarily honor every invitation. Linus?
You see, Yvonne, in an almost morbid way, this is a sobering reality for the government, and especially for a country that is so used to very exciting elections. Now we're coming to the realities of the life in between, and in a very cruel way. When you look at the head of public service speaking there, and also PS Dr. Kipto speaking there, there is a sense of urgency in their faces, voices. They actually look startled, almost to the suggestion that, they have not been around. They've just landed and found things going on. But this is the reality. The space of governance is so exacting. If you do certain things, like what they have enumerated right there in terms of how local and foreign travel is eating up all the public resources, then these are the realities that they have to face. But there's something else that really comes out, and that is the gap between what those in government say and what they actually do. Whether you're talking of Deputy President Gachagua or the statements by Felix Kipto, don't go to Mombasa by flight. You can, if you can take SGR. You see, the period of talking will close at some point, and it will be forced to come to an end by the realities that the country is facing. Because like it's already showing, there are serious signs of trouble ahead. And especially if you look at our national debt, and I just want us to listen to the Controller of Budget, Margaret Nyakango, who spoke about the debt levels as at June this year.
Our debt as of 30th June was 10.25 trillion, which is over the legal ceiling.
Now, out of this 10 trillion, and this is one space that the government has not been very forthcoming with information. Basically, there are three sources that really put us in this situation. One is the domestic market where we borrow, and I think that actually constitutes about 50% of the of this 10.25. We also have bilaterals, that's concessionary loans, the loans we talk about of borrowing from China, borrowing from the West. And then we also have the dark horse of the debt space, and these are the syndicated loans. In the syndicated loans, this is the space where the famous Eurobonds actually sit. And Yvonne, you remember not long ago in this very table with the rest of the team, we were discussing the Eurobonds and the fact that they don't appear anywhere in the lines out there. You see, every borrowing has to be attached to a developmental project. So when you borrow, say 2 trillion, then you have to indicate where it's going, and especially in development. One of the most ridiculous answers we received not long ago between the two regimes now is that, Eurobond funds somehow found themselves into the budget.
Budgetary, yes.
Yeah,
support
yes.
was what they called it.
And they don't tell you where exactly. And so this is a really, really dark area. There's something else that is going on that must be found disturbing. And I think it was captured by our story done by Chemutai Goin earlier about the borrowing trends. Basically, the government is operating outside the rules of parliament. It's operating outside its own rules, because much borrowing is now taking place above and over what Parliament has approved.
Yeah.
Let's remember, for example, that when Parliament only approved 313 trillion sum,
you're talking about
313 trillion. Mm-hmm. Sorry, 313 billion to be borrowed. And what did we end up with? 870 billion and then 688 billion in domestic and foreign, which is about 1.5. How many times the approved amount by Parliament? So we are going into kiosk mode, and this is really dangerous. This is very, very dangerous. We are running government the same way we run political campaigns. The accountability is so low. And this is going to put us in a hole. And here is what we should fear. We should fear the direction this will take us. You know, some stories that used to look really foreign. The story of Lebanon, the story of Greece, the story of countries like Sri Lanka, which, you know, the national debt just becomes impossible. And when you look at the maths right now, we're already actually there because what we collect versus what we owe, it is impossible. We are operating in a very, very difficult space.
And you know, one of those things is, you know, like we rightfully say, historical. Some of these debts that are falling due right now are the ones that were taken at the start of the Uhuruto regime in 2013. I believe Eurobond first payment is due March next year, 2024.
June next year.
June, but SGR is around the same time. So you can see just how far things are going. And this is what happens. You take this debt and then it's 10 years later that you start to actually pay the principal because, you know, you start paying the interests, you know, before then. And this is where we find ourselves in terms of the decisions that are made over time. But one of the other very important components about your debt situation and managing that is your expenditure. Now, that is where you've got an important sphere of control. Fine, the debt has been taken, it has fallen due. This is money that you need to pay. So one of the mitigating factors to that is to reduce and lower your expenditure. What evidence of austerity, of cutbacks in spending have we seen in the last year or so? That then signals that, okay, here we are, because it is a very logical thing that we do in our households, and it is the same thing that we do in governments in terms of debt management. A very important component of debt management is to curb your expenditure.
Yeah.
Except our budgets grow bigger and bigger every year.
Right.
We have bigger deficits that we have to fund somehow. I mean, we run a deficit budget year on year in this country. I mean, it's ridiculous. You earn 20,000 shillings, but your budget for every month is 80,000. And so you have to figure out how to borrow the deficit. And those are some of the things I think that are also interesting in as much as what government officials say and what they actually do. Right. So when this administration came into office, one of the glaring things they said is how much money they found in the coffers. What was that, 93 million, was it, they said?
Yep.
I remember things like the economy was found in a dilapidated state, that not even the rats were, you know, present in the state coffers. So it would seem there was a recognition of the economic situation of the country, but then the actions that followed didn't seem in tandem with the very public recognition that we were not in a good place. So with the way we have been acting with our expenditure, does that tally with we found the economy in a dilapidated state? In fact, there was nothing in the coffers. They had been cleaned dry. And then the actions thereafter with the travel, with how much was spent on cars? 400 million shillings buying cars for the executive. You see, what you say and what you do doesn't seem to tally. And that's interesting, Sam, as we go to a break.
Right. And the most important thing, yes, they said dilapidated economy, 93 million shillings only in the coffers. But the reality is, and if you speak to different officers in government, they'll tell you there's a cash flow problem. That is why I think in the month of March or April, there was a delay in
Civil
salary
servants,
payment
yes,
for the civil servants. And this hasn't changed. But I also take issue with, remember, we've been looking for statistics on the public debt.
Yeah.
And the Central Bank of Kenya and the National Treasury, they sort of stopped counting, at least on the website. Because once you keep looking, the last figure you see is for April 2023. It has been at 9.6 trillion shillings, never changing. And then now the Control of Budget comes and says, actually, as of June 30th, it was 10.25. That's a difference of 650 billion shillings. So the question is, is it that the government borrowed 650 billion shillings between the end of April and the end of June, or is it that there was a question of accountability, but also reporting on the side of the Central Bank of Kenya and the National Treasury, who are basically the custodians and the, you would say, the primary sources of that kind of information? So that has been a question that has not been answered. But now that you hear of 10.25 trillion shillings, you understand why. Because it has already hit the ceiling. There's already a conversation. There's already a conversation of a debt anchor of 55% of the GDP, based on the GDP of 2022. According to the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, it gets you to about 7.37 trillion shillings. We already hit past 7.3 trillion shillings a long time ago. Yeah. We're actually close to 3 trillion shillings. Again, if you had to look at the deficit of the current financial year, which is 718 billion shillings, if you had to add it to the 10.25, you are inching closer to 11 trillion shillings. Yeah. So this really, it is not telling in as far as the plans of the government are concerned. But then again, there is a concern because even the controller is explaining that it's partly is because of more borrowing, but also the depreciating shilling, Kenya shilling. If you have to look at the Eurobond, borrowed in 2014 in June, it was $2 billion.
How much?
We'll have to pay $2 billion next year. So $2 billion in 2014 was 175 billion shillings.
Today?
Today, it is 294 billion shillings. So that's a spike of about 68%. By the time we're paying that debt in June next year, I can assure you, it will be more than 290 billion shillings that you're talking about. So really, we are in such a bad place, but I also feel the government needs to explain this more, because now it starts to explain why they've been having this appetite for more revenues from the people. But even as they do that, the big English we keep hearing of fiscal consolidation, it has to happen. Even if you want to raise more revenue, you have to cut on the cost.
Yes.
Excuse me. And we have to begin by cutting, because you may not cut salaries, you may not cut on the debt servicing, but as of the question of the expenditure that can actually be cut, please just cut it. If you look at Parliament, because they spent more than 9 billion shillings on travel, and these are the representatives of the people. I believe if a meeting is being held in Mombasa, which is expensive to maintain them there, and of course at their rates, probably that meeting can be held, like the Deputy President says, like Felix Koskei says, can be held at Parliament. Because if you there's
something very simple and logical about the making of states, which is why countries have something called the capital city, where you actually try and put the headquarters of your government operations in one place. That is why you have Nairobi as our capital city. The essence of that is to try and make sure that the national government operates from here. That's why we have the parliament here. We have all the ministerial offices here. Now, the problem has been, and there's something that is happening quietly, and that is the national government trying to sort of devolve its operations, and it comes at a very, very high cost. I want to actually point out one, even a simple thing like holding a cabinet meeting in Kakamega, moving 22 cabinet secretaries from Nairobi to Kakamega.
And possibly their staff, huh?
Yes.
So it's not just
you're moving an office. Exactly. They don't just come in with they're supposed to be...
No, wako technological.
Technology.
They use iPads.
So they come with the iPad and iPhones, I hope. Now, but you see, it's a moving office. You have to go with your driver. You have to go with your security. Some of them need their PAs and all that. You're moving an entire office. So there's also the per diem. They have to spend the nights there and all that. This is where the mathematics is coming from. This is where the numbers are coming from. When the controller of budget says 4.8 billion, for example, going into local travel, because we are spending mindlessly. And look, government allowances, and that is normally the bit, that basically keeps some of those jobs, makes some of those jobs very attractive. We talk of the SRC rates of, it's about 500,000, but you go out for a certain number of days, it can even triple your salary. And so these are things that civil servants have happily really embraced, which is why you saw the head of public service getting alarmed there, because everybody knows it, that this is this is the only way we can make this money. But again, it's just down to, can you preach water and drink water and not wine? Can we do that?
Yvonne, as we embrace technology, 30 seconds. One of the things that the COVID period taught us, maybe this is a simple explanation or a simple argument, was it's actually possible to have meetings on Zoom or Google Meet. We even have court sessions that way. I've just come back from my travels. And where I was...
Not at government expense.
No,
just,
not at government
we might
expense.
add.
To save on travel costs.
Yeah.
To even save on... we're trying to look at the issue of climate change and get less people off the road as much as possible. You have people working from home maybe two days a week. And they still have their normal meetings. And they still have work is done. Output has not been affected. Because you're thinking ahead, you're saving costs and all that. What stops some of our meetings to happen that way? Yeah, even international ones. I mean, not every trip is going to visit a factory to see how they're doing things, or not every trip is going to see how whatever project is being done. Maybe some are just consultations, which can be done, because we have seen meetings even of EAC with the president attending it on Zoom.
Yeah.
Which means it's actually possible to try and save costs by doing our meetings that way. It's what you're talking about. Unaangalia mfuko wako, uko vipi? And then deal na hiyo. Yeah, try and find all these small ways here and there to karibu ku cut costs. Because as I said, it's terrible that at a time when you're even seeing civil servants, what were the numbers about? The number of civil servants in need of counseling has risen from 5,000 to 13,000 in 1 year. And one of the issues because of the financial crisis they're facing and all that, you spend so much money on luxuries. Yeah. And then you expect people to understand. Yeah. They don't. It almost seems like you don't see the reality on the ground. Remember when the campaigns were going on, Yvonne, this government was elected by the people because it seemed to be able to understand what the issues affecting the people were. These are people probably who are going to see what our problems are. But having been in office for a year, it's almost like unasahau, what the promises that were made just a year ago.
And which were done so articulately. We're going to take a break. I want to leave you with this soundbite from Felix Koske. So apparently you can monetize just about everything in government, including leave days. This is a new one. I mean, in private sector, leave days not taken are forfeited. But clearly they can be monetized in government. Listen to this as we go to a break. We'll be right back.
Number one, each and every officer with accumulated leave has to take his leave. And the policy of government is that you can only carry forward a half of your leave days in a year. And a half is 15. So going forward from this financial year, it is only 15 days that will be carried forward. Number two, there is no commutation of the leave days to cash. So we are not going to pay for an officer not going on leave, because there is no excuse at all, because each and every institution have officers who are qualified enough, who are able to take care of the office while the officer is on leave.